John. Okay, now to the program today, obtained by Russ Green, so I'll give him full credit for it. But the program today is Vic Parker, editor at the Gilmer Mirror. And I don't know if some of you read, this is probably in the way, read the Mirror every week, as some of us do. And he has a column there, and you know what he puts in that column. Therefore, I'm not going to try to tell you what he's going to say today because there's just no telling what he's going to tell us today. So Vic, come on up.
All right, Vic. I can't use that.
Well, you kind of need to because most of us can't hear you if you don't.
Oh, okay. Well, all right.
Do your best.
Okay. A little bit about myself first. I've been helping Russ out at the Mirror for about 4.5 years. And I used to own the Jefferson Jumbo Cube, owned it for 10 years. Been in the weekly newspaper business just about my whole career, although I did do a couple of years stint at the Long News Journalist, their business editor. But I'm here today to talk about, as the program says, photography of then and now. And I'm loath to admit it, but putting out a newspaper these days is a lot easier than it used to be. It's something that you really don't tell people that it is. And one of the reasons it's so much easier is the photography. Back when we were using dark rooms, it would take a minimum of 30 minutes to get a picture ready. You didn't put the picture on the page, you had a black or red piece of paper on a grid sheet, and put your pictures in a box with a tag on it that had the date, the page number, and the first few words of a cut line. We call them cut lines, most people call them captions. So you had to be real careful about page numbers and what have you, so that you didn't have a beauty queen with a cut line number from somebody that had a prize pig. And that's happened. Not to me, but it has happened. I was in Carthage for several years and in a competitive situation, and we covered 3 football teams. We covered Carthage, we covered Beckville, we covered Tatum. And we traveled with them, of course, and if they were 100 miles away, we went 100 miles. It was not unusual for us to go to work at 8 o'clock on Friday morning and finish the paper at 6 o'clock Saturday morning. And a lot of that time was spent in the darkroom, because you had to, let me get this out. First thing you had to do, was develop the film. I'm going to lay this down for just a moment. You've seen movies, I know, from the 40s, what have you, where the guy's in the dark room with the red lights on and they're doing the picture and the image comes up. That's well and good, but when you do this, you have to develop the film to start, and you have to do it in total darkness. There's no light, there's no light. So basically, you have to put this film on this spool, not being able to see it. I'm probably not doing very good because I haven't done it in a long time. And it has to be done right, because if you end up with a bubble in there somewhere, it did good. A bubble in there somewhere, the developer can't get to it, and you won't have an image on that part of the film. Then you put it in here, pour the developer in, and it stayed in here depending on the temperature of the developer. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 7 minutes. Because we were a semi-weekly newspaper, and pretty large one at that, you had to multitask. I was the publisher of that paper. I wasn't the editor. I had my own editor. But I still was there the whole time. And while this was developing, you'd go do something else, like write a story, or finish a story, start a story, work on a story. And sometimes, and this has happened to me, forget about this. And it's supposed to be in there 7 minutes, and you look up and it's been in there 12 minutes, then you got a problem. And it's hard to tell you what the picture would look like. It would just be real glary. If you left it there too long, it would be black. Anyway, say 7 minutes. Then you dump that out, and you pour a fixer in here, which fixes the image on the film for 5 minutes. Then you pour that out, you'd open it up, and you'd run water on it for about 3 minutes. Then you took it out, take it from the spool, we had like a clothesline in there, and we used clothespins, and you'd hang it up there and let it dry. If you were in a hurry, you'd take a hairdryer to it, otherwise it would take 15, 20 minutes to dry. So luckily you could do more than one at the same time, which was usually the case, which saved a little bit of time. But it was a time-consuming process. All that well, let me go back. After it dried, you put it in the enlarger. Some of you probably know this. And then you made the print. Then that's when you could turn the red light on and put the print in the developer until the image came up, put it in the fixture, and then put it in the water. Then you hang that up. That whole process could take 30 to 45 minutes. You can do it in about a minute now with Photoshop. I did Photoshop when I was in Jefferson. I've forgotten how to do it now. Russ knows how to do it. And of course you can manipulate the photographs as well. You know, put somebody's head on somebody else's body if you want to, that sort of thing. No, you can, if it's too dark, you can make it light. Russ is better to tell you that than I am. But truly, you can do it in about a minute. The very same technology that has allowed us to get to that point with photography is going to contribute to the decline and demise of the newspaper industry completely. It's going to go away. It's going to be put on the shelf with buggy whips and hula hoops and carbon paper because of where we are right now, where we're going with the internet. And I sold my paper in 2010. I sold it just about the right time, didn't I, Russ?
You sure did.
And another thing about photography, these are what we use today, of course, and some of you probably have one of these. These things are just, they're like computers. I mean, it's a camera, but it's a computer as well. And instead of this, I have this.
That's going to fall off if you...
Oh, okay. I have this. And I don't know how many this thing will hold, but it'll hold a lot. When I was covering football games, I used this camera. This is a single lens reflex camera. This is called a twin lens reflex camera, obviously. This is what I use to shoot football and basketball. And the reason I did is because this is 35 millimeter film. This camera took 2 1/4 inch film. Each frame is 2 1/4 inches. The reason they were better is because the larger the film, the less you have to enlarge it. The more you enlarge a picture, the worse the quality gets. So this is the camera I would use. It'd have a pistol grip and a flash out here. And one of the good things about this camera as well, as opposed to that one, is that the flash would synchronize with this camera at any shutter speed. These cameras, back then, it would sync at 60th of a second, that's all, which is just barely enough to stop motion. This camera, you look down through here and you focus like this, but you couldn't do that in sports, so it has what's called a sport finder. And I just look through here and take the picture. Most people use what's called a Vivitar flash. These cameras today are so advanced that they have a built-in flash right there that will illuminate this entire room if it needs to. It knows when it needs to flash and when it doesn't. Obviously done right there. In addition to the photography, how much time have I got at the time?
You're okay.
Okay. We entered the age of pagination. When, Russ? Late 80s?
We did about 20 years ago, but
Yeah, like
we were
early
late.
90s,
Yeah.
where you sit in front of a computer and put the newspaper together. When I first started, we had, as I said, we had these grid sheets that were the size of a broadsheet newspaper page. And copy would come out in galleys, and we'd take scissors and cut it out, run it through a waxer, put it on the page. I can sit this morning, I didn't build a page this morning, but I can sit there and build a page once we have the ads in place. Depending on how hard it is to write a particular headline, and some of them are hard to write, I can do a page in, I don't know, 7, 8 minutes. And it used to take forever. And when you had to do it paced up, when you wrote a headline, if you didn't get the headline right, it was too long or not long enough, you had to go back and do it again. That's why we learned in journalism school how to count headlines. In other words, a W counts for more than an L, for instance, or an I. So you had to know that in order to do headline. That's really about all. I didn't bring any grid sheets, I don't think. Do you have any grid sheets, Fred? No. They're with the buggy whips. That's about all. Just wanted to draw the distinction and the difference between newspaper photography today and newspaper photography then. So, if anybody has any questions about the newspaper business, I bet I can answer them.
I've got a question.
Okay?
With the latest technology that you're talking about, so I assume that cut lines don't ever end up on the wrong photo.
I wouldn't say that. I would never say never. Particularly as you get on deadline, when the deadline's passed, and we still have those. Things can get out of control. It gets pretty hectic, pretty tense. I'll tell you a real short story about the Marshall newspaper. The News Messenger, and I knew the editor. And I called him up and asked him if it was true, and he said, yes, unfortunately it was. They had a reporter who was doing an obit, and he ran across the letters MS, RG or GR, which of course was Monsignor. He didn't know that, so he yelled across the newsroom, he said, what is MSGR? And somebody said, monosodium glutamate. And guess what? It ended up in the paper. So I called it Mike. I called it Mike Timmons. Most people ask me what Jimplecute means. Does anybody know? What? The newspaper in Jefferson is the Jimplecute. Huh? Anybody know? There's several stories, one of which is that back in the day, the editor of the paper was known to drink a little bit. A lot of editors are known for that. And he had his composing stick when they did the old type. And he had had a few, and he dropped it, and he looked down, and it spelled out Jimplecute. That's not true. If I can remember, it's an acronym for joining industry, manufacturing, planting, labor, equity, and union together everlasting. That's what the Jimplecute is. It's the 5th oldest newspaper in the state of Texas. Started in 1848. I think it's the 4th oldest. I found 1, 2, and 3, but I couldn't find 4. So I'm just going to say it's. I sold it in 2010 and retired, and then they prevailed on me to help them out at the Mirror. Their Mac was going to leave. So I've been doing that since 2014. I come over 1 day a week and write some headlines and edit copy and sometimes put pages together. So, yes, sir.
It seems to me the more digital we get, the more we see grammatical and spelling errors in the printed news. Is there a reason for that, or are we just seeing it?
Yeah, there's a reason for it. People don't spell the way they used to. People aren't taught. And that's, of course, the purpose of an editor is to catch those. And I do catch some. I caught one a couple of months ago that was about the city of Gilmer's budget. And the writer of the story had said that the budget was $400 and something thousand for the year. And I said, that can't be right. So I called the city manager, and sure enough, it was what, $4 million? And had I not caught it, it would have ended up in the paper as $400,000, which is substantially less than it really is. And one more little funny thing about the newspapers, and that's headlines. Sometimes, and I put some of these in Heard About Town, sometimes headlines get away from people writing, stop and think about it. In Louisiana, when I was in Vivian for 4 years. There's a town in Louisiana called Waterproof. Some of you may have heard of it. Their newspaper had a front page story about an accident where 4 guys in a car ran off into a lake and drowned. And the headline said, 4 waterproof men died in crash. Literally, it's true, but probably could have been a better headline. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'm through.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of like old 30s and 40s movies and stuff. And is there ever going to be a defining, I guess, news source? You know, I mean, for 500 years, the newspaper was the.
Oh, you talking about replacing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's web pages.
I mean, is there ever going to be one go-to New York Times or?
Hope not. No. As I said a few minutes ago, the industry's dying. The weeklies will probably be the last to go because the people who read the weeklies have less opportunity to see a website that's going to tell you what happened at the school board meeting or the city council meeting or the commissioner's court meeting. So they're going to last a little longer, but they're going to. And it's too bad. Thank you very much. Get all the stuff.